A piercing cry rang out across the dusty auction yard as Zara Owens stumbled onto the wooden platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. The year was 1873, and Silverton, Colorado was as unforgiving as the rugged mountains that surrounded it. The mining town had sprung up almost overnight with the discovery of silver, bringing with it the worst of humanity alongside those simply seeking fortune. "What am I bid for this fine specimen?" the auctioneer bellowed, yanking Zara forward by her bonds. "Young, strong, can cook and clean. Perfect for any man's household." Zara's heart hammered wildly in her chest. Just 3 weeks ago, she had been traveling west with her elderly uncle, their wagon filled with hopes and dreams of a new beginning. Then came the bandits, the bullets, the blood. Her uncle dead, their money and possessions stolen. Zara had wandered delirious with grief until she collapsed outside a saloon. When she awoke, she found herself in debt to the establishment's owner for room and board, a debt he now intended to settle by selling her to the highest bidder. The crowd of miners, cowboys, and townspeople stared up at her with varying expressions: lust, indifference, contempt. Zara, 19 years old and utterly alone, fought against the tears threatening to spill. She would not give them the satisfaction. "Do I hear $5? The auctioneer called, his voice carrying across the yard. Silence. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. $3 then. More silence. "Come now, gentlemen. She's worth something to someone." From the back of the crowd, a gruff voice called out, "I'll give you 2 chickens for her." Laughter rippled through the assembly, but the auctioneer's eyes lit up at finally receiving a bid. "2 chickens from Mr. Fitzgerald. Do I hear any other offers?" The crowd fell silent again. No one matched the bid. 2 chickens going once, going twice. The auctioneer's gavel hovered in the air. "Sold to Mr. Fitzgerald for 2 chickens." Zara's legs nearly gave way beneath her. Sold for 2 chickens. The humiliation burned hotter than the midday sun beating down on her uncovered head. She'd been valued less than a decent pair of boots. The crowd parted as her buyer approached the platform. She braced herself, expecting to see a weathered old miner or lecherous saloon keeper. Instead, a tall figure in a worn leather duster and wide-brimmed hat strode forward. When he reached the steps, he looked up, and Zara found herself staring into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. Owen Vance removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with hints of copper in the sunlight. He appeared to be in his late 20s, his face weathered by sun and wind but handsome in a rugged way. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the stubble of his beard. "The chickens are in my wagon," he said to the auctioneer, his voice deep and steady. "You can collect them now." The auctioneer nodded eagerly and hurried off the platform. Owen turned his attention to Zara, who stood rigid with fear and humiliation. Without a word, he pulled a knife from his belt. Zara flinched, but he merely sliced through the ropes binding her wrists. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. Zara nodded, rubbing her raw wrists. She followed him down the steps, aware of the stairs following them. Her legs trembled with each step, but she forced herself to keep moving. Whatever fate awaited her, it had to be better than the auction block. "My wagon's this way," Owen said, guiding her through the crowd without touching her. They walked in silence to the edge of town where a sturdy wagon stood hitched to 2 strong horses. A small cage containing 2 plump chickens sat in the back, which the auctioneer was already eagerly collecting. "Pleasure doing business," the auctioneer said, clutching the cage. "She ain't much to look at, but she'll serve her purpose, I reckon." Owen's jaw tightened. "Get on your way." When the auctioneer had departed, Owen turned to Zara. "There's water in the canteen if you're thirsty." "We've got a long ride ahead." Zara stared at him suspiciously. "Where are you taking me?" "My ranch. About a day's ride from here." "And what do you expect of me there?" she asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Owen's expression remained unreadable. "Nothing you're thinking. I need help around the place, that's all. You'll have your own room, regular meals, and fair treatment." "Why should I believe you?" "You don't have to. But I'm offering you a chance to work for your keep, not whatever else you might be fearing." He climbed onto the wagon seat and extended a hand to help her up. "Your choice. Stay here or come with me." Zara looked back at the town, then at Owen's outstretched hand. There was no real choice, and they both knew it. She took his hand and climbed onto the seat beside him. As they pulled away from Silverton, Zara kept her eyes fixed on the horizon ahead. She had no tears left to shed. All she had was the will to survive, and for now that meant placing her trust in a stranger who had purchased her for the price of 2 chickens. The journey to Owen's ranch was largely silent. Zara sat rigidly beside him, her fingers clutching the edge of the wooden seat. She studied him from the corner of her eye, trying to gauge what kind of man would buy a woman at auction. His hands were calloused but steady on the reins, his profile strong against the backdrop of mountains and sky. He hadn't tried to touch her or speak to her, beyond offering water and some jerky from his provisions. As the day wore on, the landscape changed from rocky mountain terrain to rolling foothills covered in pine and aspen. They followed a winding trail that grew increasingly faint, suggesting few travelers ventured this way. "Not much farther now," Owen said as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. "We'll be there before dark." Zara nodded but remained silent. What could she say to this man who owned her now? The very thought made her stomach clench. "You haven't told me your name," he said after another stretch of silence. "Zara," she replied softly. "Zara Owens." "Owen Vance," he offered in return. "Most folks just call me Vance." They crested a hill, and suddenly the land opened up before them, a valley nestled between protective ridges, with a creek winding through stands of cottonwood trees. A modest but well-maintained cabin stood near the center, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. In the nearest pasture, cattle grazed peacefully. "The double V," Owen said, a hint of pride in his voice. "It's not much compared to some of the big spreads, but it's mine. 160 acres, 20 head of cattle, some chickens, and a decent vegetable garden." Zara couldn't help but feel a twinge of admiration. The place had a peaceful, orderly appearance that spoke of hard work and care. They pulled up to the cabin just as the last rays of sunlight gilded the meadow. Owen jumped down from the wagon and came around to her side, offering his hand again. This time, Zara accepted it with less hesitation. "Let me show you where you'll be staying," he said, leading her toward the cabin. The interior was simple but clean, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, and a rocking chair near the hearth. A few shelves held books, an unexpected sight that made Zara pause. "You read?" she asked before she could stop herself. Owen nodded. "When there's time, winter evenings especially." He pointed to a door on the right. "That's your room there, mine's on the other side. The washroom's out back, nothing fancy, but there's a pump for fresh water." Zara walked cautiously to the door he'd indicated and pushed it open. The small room held a narrow bed with a clean quilt, a chest for clothing, and a small table with a basin. A window looked out toward the mountains. "It's not much," Owen said from the doorway, "but it's private. No one will bother you there." "Thank you," Zara said, surprising herself with the words. "I'll get your things from the wagon." "I don't have any things," she reminded him, the reality of her situation crashing back. Owen paused, then nodded. "My sister left some clothes here last time she visited. They might fit you. I'll find them." He hesitated before adding, "I'll start dinner. You can rest if you want." When he had gone, Zara sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to breathe. The quilt smelled of sunshine and lavender, not the musty scent she had expected. The room was small but clean, with no evidence it had been used recently. True to his word, Owen returned with a bundle of clothing, simple cotton dresses, a nightgown, undergarments, and a woolen shawl. He placed them on the bed without looking at her directly. "The pump's out back if you want to wash up before dinner," he said. "Take whatever time you need." After he left, Zara examined the clothes. They were well made and only slightly worn. The thought of clean clothing against her skin made her throat tight with emotion. She selected a blue cotton dress and headed for the washroom, determined to remove every trace of the auction yard from her body. The meal that evening was simple beans, cornbread, and dried apple slices, but to Zara, it tasted better than anything she could remember. They ate in awkward silence until Owen finally spoke. "I should explain why I was at that auction today," he said, setting down his fork. "I went to town for supplies and to sell some furs. I wasn't looking to buy anyone." Zara kept her eyes on her plate. "Then why did you?" Owen's brow furrowed. "I couldn't just leave you there. What they were doing, it wasn't right." He looked uncomfortable with his own admission. "I know it doesn't make much sense. I needed help around here and you needed help of a different kind. So I'm to be your servant?" "No," he said firmly. "You'll work same as me and you'll have a place to stay and food to eat. When you want to leave, you can. I won't stop you." Zara looked up in surprise. "You'd let me go just like that?" "This isn't a prison, Miss Owens. It's a ranch, and you're not property no matter what that auctioneer said." He stood and carried his plate to the wash basin. "We'll talk more in the morning. You must be tired." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Zara stared at the ceiling and considered her situation. She was alive. She had shelter. The man who had purchased her hadn't forced himself on her or treated her cruelly. It was more than she had dared hope for when standing on that auction block. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. Perhaps not ever again. As dawn broke over the valley, Zara woke to the sound of movement in the main room. She dressed quickly in one of the dresses Owen had provided and stepped out to find him stoking the fire in the stove. "Morning," he said, straightening up. "Coffee's on. Hope you slept well." "Well enough," she replied, moving to the stove to help with breakfast. "What work needs doing today?" Owen looked surprised at her directness. "The garden needs tending and I've got mending to do on the north fence." "You're welcome to help with whichever suits you." "I can cook," Zara offered, "and garden. My uncle and I had a small farm in Pennsylvania before." She trailed off, the memories still too raw. "The garden would be a help then," Owen said, tactfully not pressing for details. "There's a pretty good patch of vegetables that's been neglected while I've been seeing to the cattle." After a breakfast of porridge and coffee, Owen showed Zara around the property. The garden was indeed neglected, with weeds threatening to overtake the rows of vegetables. The chicken coop housed a dozen hens and a rooster. A small barn held 2 milk cows, a plow horse, and Owen's saddle horse, a handsome bay gelding. "This was my father's place," Owen explained as they walked. "He came out here in '53 during the first silver rush. Found this valley instead of silver and decided it was worth more than any mine. Built everything himself with some help from the neighbors when they could spare it." "Where is he now?" Zara asked. "Died 2 winters ago. Pneumonia. My mother passed when I was young." He pointed to a small fenced area on a gentle slope near a stand of aspens. "They're both there." Zara nodded, understanding the quiet reverence in his voice. "And your sister?" "Married a shopkeeper in Denver. Visits when she can, but she's expecting her second child, so it might be a while." As they returned to the garden, Owen handed Zara a wide-brimmed straw hat. "Sun gets fierce up here," he explained. "I'll be working on the north fence if you need anything. Don't push yourself too hard on your first day." With that, he collected his tools and headed across the pasture, leaving Zara alone with her thoughts and the weedy garden. She put on the hat, rolled up her sleeves, and set to work, finding a strange comfort in the familiar task of pulling weeds from around the tender vegetable plants. By midday, Zara had cleared nearly half the garden. The sun beat down mercilessly, but the mountain air remained crisp and refreshing. She paused to stretch her back, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. In the distance, she could see Owen working on the fence line, his movements steady and efficient. She returned to the cabin to prepare a simple lunch, carrying it out to him in a covered basket. He looked up in surprise as she approached. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the basket on a nearby stump. Owen wiped his hands on his trousers and opened the basket to find bread, cheese, and sliced apples. "You didn't have to do this," he said, but his appreciative expression belied his words. "You've been kind," Zara replied, unsure why she felt compelled to bring him lunch. "It seemed the least I could do." They ate in companionable silence, the tension between them easing slightly in the warm afternoon sun. "Garden coming along?" Owen asked between bites. Zara nodded. "It's good soil. Everything wants to grow there, just needs some tending." "Like most things, I suppose," Owen mused, glancing at her thoughtfully. The days fell into a rhythm. Zara tended the garden, gathered eggs, cooked meals, and helped with whatever tasks needed doing. Owen worked with the cattle, mended fences, and made trips to the nearby stream to fish. They spoke little at first, but gradually conversation came more easily. Zara learned that Owen had fought briefly in the Civil War, returning home wounded to help his aging father with the ranch. He preferred books about history and exploration, could play a passable tune on the harmonica, and had a deep, abiding love for the land his father had claimed. Owen, in turn, discovered that Zara had been raised by her uncle after her parents died of fever when she was 12. She could recite poetry from memory, make bread rise like a miracle, and identify most of the wildflowers that dotted the meadows around the ranch. One evening, about 2 weeks after Zara's arrival, a thunderstorm rolled across the valley. Lightning split the sky, and rain pounded the cabin roof. Owen sat at the table cleaning his rifle while Zara mended a shirt by lamplight. "Storms got the cattle nervous," Owen remarked, glancing out the window at a particularly bright flash. "Hope they don't break through the fence again." "Does that happen often?" Zara asked, looking up from her mending. "Often enough. Last time, I spent 3 days tracking them down." He reassembled the rifle with practiced movements. "Your garden's getting quite impressive. Never seen those tomato plants looking so healthy." "They just needed attention," Zara said, pleased by the compliment. "I found some wild herbs by the creek that might be good for cooking. I could show you tomorrow." Owen nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'd like that." A sudden crash of thunder made Zara jump, dropping her needle. Owen noticed her trembling hands as she retrieved it. "Storms frighten you?" he asked gently. Zara hesitated, then nodded. "When I was little, lightning struck our barn. The fire took everything, including my father's best horse. He went in to save it and was badly burned." She swallowed hard. "He survived, but he was never the same." Owen set aside his rifle and moved to the fireplace, adding another log. "My father used to say that lightning was the mountains talking to each other. Said if you listened carefully, you could hear what they were saying." "And what are they saying tonight?" Zara asked, grateful for the distraction. Owen tilted his head as if listening. "That change is coming, that nothing stays the same forever." His eyes met hers across the room. "Even when we wanted to." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken meaning. Then another crash of thunder broke the spell, and Owen returned to his rifle while Zara bent over her mending once more. That night, lying awake listening to the storm, Zara realized something that both comforted and terrified her. She was beginning to feel at home at the Double V. And more concerning still, she was beginning to care for its owner. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Zara rose early and found Owen already outside, checking for damage. She prepared breakfast, and they ate together before setting out to inspect the rest of the property. "Creek's running high," Owen observed as they approached the water. "Storm must have been worse up in the high country." The normally peaceful stream had transformed into a rushing torrent, brown with mud and debris. As they watched, a large branch swept past, nearly taking out part of the bank. "We should check the bridge," Owen said, referring to the small wooden crossing that connected the ranch to the main trail. They followed the creek downstream to where a simple log bridge spanned the water. Half of it had been washed away by the flood, leaving only a precarious remnant clinging to the near bank. "That's not good," Owen said, frowning. "That was our easiest way to town." "Can it be repaired?" Zara asked, peering at the damaged structure. "Eventually." "Need to wait for the water to go down first." He scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Means were cut off for a while, though. Good thing we stocked up on supplies last week." As they turned to head back to the cabin, a flash of movement on the far bank caught Zara's eye. "Owen," she said urgently, pointing. "Look there." A young deer had become stranded on a small island of land as the creek had risen around it. The frightened animal paced back and forth, the water closing in with each passing minute. Without hesitation, Owen stripped off his boots and outer shirt. "Stay here," he instructed Zara, then waded into the rushing water. Zara watched anxiously as he fought the current, making his way toward the stranded deer. The water rose to his chest in places, threatening to sweep him away. When he reached the small island, the deer backed away nervously. "Easy," she heard him say softly to the animal. "Easy now." With patient movements, Owen managed to get close enough to pick up the young deer. Cradling it against his chest, he began the treacherous journey back across the flooded creek. Twice he nearly lost his footing, causing Zara to gasp in fear, but each time he recovered and pressed on. When he finally reached the bank, Owen gently set the deer down. It hesitated for a moment, then bounded away into the trees. Zara rushed to Owen's side as he collapsed onto the grass, breathing heavily. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen," she said, trying to mask her concern with scolding. Owen looked up at her, water streaming from his hair. "My father always said to take care of everything that lives on your land," he explained between breaths. "Everything deserves a chance." In that moment, looking down at his earnest face, Zara understood why he had purchased her at that auction. It wasn't for labor or companionship, or any of the darker reasons a man might buy a woman. It was because Owen Vance couldn't stand by and watch anything suffer if he had the power to prevent it. She helped him to his feet, acutely aware of his proximity as he leaned on her shoulder. His soaked clothing clung to the strong lines of his body, and Zara felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "You should get into dry clothes," she said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears, "before you catch your death." Owen looked down at her, his blue eyes searching her face. "Yes," he agreed softly. "I suppose I should." As spring gave way to early summer, the ranch bloomed under their combined care. Zara's garden produced bountifully, and Owen's cattle grew fat on the rich mountain grass. The bridge was eventually repaired, reconnecting them to the outside world, but neither seemed in a hurry to leave the peaceful valley. One morning, Owen announced he needed to ride into the nearest town for supplies. "Should be back by nightfall," he told Zara as he saddled his horse. "Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course," she assured him, trying not to show her disappointment at his departure. "I've plenty to keep me busy." Owen hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I've been meaning to give you this," he said, holding out a small leather pouch. "It's your wages for the work you've done, 3 months' worth." Zara stared at the pouch in surprise. "Wages? But I thought that working here was payment enough for what happened at the auction." Owen shook his head. "You've more than earned your keep, Zara. This is yours by right." She accepted the pouch, feeling the weight of coins inside. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than she'd had since the bandits took everything. "Thank you," she said quietly. Owen nodded, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "If there's anything specific you need from town, just say the word." Zara thought for a moment. "Perhaps some fabric and thread, if it's not too much trouble." "What color?" he asked, surprising her with the question. "Blue," she answered without hesitation. "Like the mountain columbines." A smile touched Owen's lips. "Blue it is, then." After he rode off, Zara found herself at loose ends despite the many chores awaiting her. The cabin felt emptier without Owen's presence, a realization that both startled and concerned her. She had come to rely on him, to enjoy his company, to look forward to their conversations over meals and their comfortable silences in the evenings. She was halfway to falling in love with him, and it terrified her. To distract herself, Zara decided to give the cabin a thorough cleaning. She swept and scrubbed, washed the windows until they gleamed, and even rearranged the books on the shelves. In Owen's room, which she entered with some trepidation, she changed the bedding and dusted the sparse furnishings. A small wooden box on his bedside table caught her attention. It wasn't locked, and before she could consider the impropriety, Zara had opened it. Inside lay several treasures: a pocket watch with a cracked face, a faded photograph of a stern-looking man and a smiling woman who must have been Owen's parents, a letter written in a delicate hand, and a small, worn book of poetry. Zara carefully lifted the book, recognizing it as one her uncle had often read to her, Wordsworth's collected poems. The pages fell open to "She was a phantom of delight," the margins filled with neat annotations in what she presumed was Owen's handwriting. The intimacy of the discovery made her close the book quickly and return it to the box. This was a side of Owen she hadn't seen, the thoughtful man who read poetry and kept treasured mementos close at hand. It only deepened the feeling she was trying desperately to ignore. As promised, Owen returned by nightfall, his saddlebags laden with supplies. Among them was a length of blue fabric exactly the shade of mountain columbines, along with matching thread and buttons. "It's beautiful," Zara exclaimed, running her fingers over the soft cotton. "Thank you." "There's something else," Owen said, reaching into his coat. He withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For you." Zara unwrapped it to find a book, a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets. She looked up at him in surprise. "You mentioned once that your uncle used to read them to you," Owen explained, a faint color rising to his cheeks. "Thought you might like to have your own copy." "It's perfect," Zara whispered, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Owen replied, busying himself with unpacking the rest of the supplies. "Just glad you like it." That night, after Owen had gone to bed, Zara sat by the dying fire reading her new book. The familiar words brought comfort, but they also stirred a longing in her heart. She found herself thinking of Owen's annotations in the Wordsworth volume, wondering if he found the same beauty in these sonnets that she did. The following days brought a heat wave to the valley. Work continued despite the scorching temperatures, with both Owen and Zara rising early to complete the most strenuous tasks before the worst of the heat. In the afternoons, they retreated to the shade of the cottonwoods by the creek, where the water provided some relief from the relentless sun. "Never known it to be this hot up here," Owen remarked one afternoon as they sat with their feet dangling in the cool water. "Valley's usually 10 degrees cooler than the lowlands." Zara wiped perspiration from her forehead. "My uncle used to say extreme weather brings extreme changes." Owen glanced at her curiously. "Your uncle sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," Zara agreed, smiling at the memory. "Stubborn as a mule, but wise in his way. He raised me after my parents died, taught me everything I know about farming and life." Her smile faded. "I miss him terribly." "What happened?" Owen asked gently. "If you don't mind telling me." Zara took a deep breath, the memories still painful. "We were heading west to start over. Uncle Henry had a friend in Oregon who offered him a partnership in a store. We'd sold everything to make the journey." She stared at the rippling water. "The attack came at dawn just outside a small settlement in Nebraska. 5 men, faces covered. They killed Uncle Henry before he could even reach for his gun. Shot him right through the heart." Owen's hand found hers, warm and steady. "I'm sorry, Zara." "They took everything, our money, our supplies, even my mother's locket. Left me alive, though I'm not sure why." She swallowed hard. "I wandered for days before I reached that mining town. The saloon owner found me collapsed in the street. Said he'd help me, give me a place to stay until I recovered. I didn't realize he was adding up a debt with every meal, every night in that back room. And when you couldn't pay." Owen's voice was tight with anger. Zara nodded. "He put me up for auction. Said it was legal since I'd signed some paper when I was half delirious with exhaustion." She looked up at Owen. "Then you came along with your 2 chickens." A sad smile touched his lips. "Wish I'd had more than chickens to offer." "2 chickens was enough," Zara said softly. "More than enough." They sat in silence for a long moment, their hands still joined. Finally, Owen spoke. "My father always told me a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he's willing to give away." He looked at her intently. "I believe that now more than ever." The double meaning of his words hung in the air between them. Zara felt her heart quicken, but before she could respond, a distant rumble of thunder broke the moment. "Storm's coming," Owen said, withdrawing his hand and standing up. "We should head back." The storm that night was violent, with wind that threatened to tear the roof from the cabin and rain that fell in blinding sheets. Zara and Owen sat at the table playing cards by lamplight, pretending the tempest outside wasn't rattling the windows and sending occasional drafts down the chimney to make the fire dance wildly. "Your play," Owen reminded her after a particularly loud thunderclap made her jump. Zara forced herself to concentrate on her cards. "I think you're winning on purpose," she accused lightly, laying down her hand. Owen chuckled. "Would I do that?" "Without a doubt." She smiled, grateful for the distraction from the storm. A sudden, sharp crack split the air, followed by a tremendous crash that shook the cabin. Both of them leapt to their feet. "That was close," Owen said, moving to the window. In the brief illumination of lightning, his face went pale. "The barn. Lightning must have struck it." Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "Stay here," he ordered Zara. "I'm coming with you," she insisted, already pulling on her boots. "You'll need help with the animals." There was no time to argue. They raced through the downpour toward the barn, where flames were already licking at the roof despite the rain. Inside, the horses whinnied in terror, and the milk cows bellowed their distress. Owen flung open the barn doors and rushed inside, Zara close behind. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning hay. "Get the horses," Owen shouted over the din. "I'll handle the cows." Zara hurried to the stalls where the plow horse and Owen's bay gelding were kicking at their enclosures in panic. She managed to get halters on both animals and led them out into the rain, tying them securely to a hitching post well away from the burning structure. By the time she returned to the barn, Owen had freed the cows, but the fire was spreading rapidly. Flames engulfed the hayloft and were working their way down the walls. "We need to save what we can," Owen called, already throwing saddles and tack through the doorway. They worked frantically, salvaging tools, feed, and equipment as the fire raged around them. The heat was intense, and smoke burned Zara's lungs with every breath. Just as they were making a final trip to retrieve Owen's prized saddle, a burning beam crashed down, blocking their path to the door. "This way," Owen shouted, grabbing Zara's hand and pulling her toward a side exit. They burst out into the rain just as the roof of the barn collapsed in a shower of sparks and flaming debris. Coughing and gasping for air, they stood in the downpour watching as the fire consumed what remained of the structure. Owen's face was grim in the orange glow, soot and sweat streaking his features. "Are you hurt?" Zara asked, scanning him for injuries. He shook his head. "I'm fine." She looked back at the blazing ruin. "Owen, I'm so sorry about the barn." His jaw tightened. "It's just a building. It can be rebuilt." He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the flames. "When I saw that beam fall, Zara, if anything had happened to you." The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. Before she could respond, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against him as if to assure himself she was truly unharmed. Zara felt his heart pounding against her cheek, matching the rapid beat of her own. When he finally released her, his hands remained on her shoulders. Rain streamed down their faces as they stared at each other, something unspoken passing between them. "We should check on the animals," Zara said softly, breaking the spell. "Make sure they're not spooked." Owen nodded, reluctantly dropping his hands. "Yes, you're right." They spent the remainder of the night in the cabin, the doors open to accommodate the milk cows, which they had brought inside to protect from the continuing storm. The horses were secured in a lean-to that had survived the fire. By dawn, the rain had stopped and they could fully assess the damage. The barn was a total loss, but thanks to their efforts, most of the equipment and all of the animals had been saved. "Could have been worse," Owen said as they surveyed the charred remains. "Much worse." Zara nodded, thinking of how close they had come to being trapped inside. "What will you do now?" Owen squared his shoulders. "Rebuild? What else can I do? Ranch needs a barn." "We'll rebuild," Zara corrected him. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at her with surprise and something that might have been hope. "You sure about that? You've got wages saved up. Could make a new start somewhere else if you wanted." Zara met his gaze steadily. "I'm sure. This is where I want to be." The weeks that followed were filled with backbreaking work. Owen salvaged what lumber he could from the ruins of the barn and made trips into the forest to fell trees for additional timber. Zara helped where she could, cooking hearty meals to fuel their labor and assisting with the actual construction whenever Owen would allow it. Word of the fire spread to neighboring ranches, and to Zara's surprise, help arrived. 3 men from a ranch 10 miles away came with tools and supplies. An elderly couple who ran a small homestead in the next valley overbrought food and offered their barn for Owen's animals until the new structure was completed. "Folks look out for each other up here," Owen explained when Zara expressed her surprise at the generosity. "Has to be that way. Mountains don't forgive those who try to make it alone." Working alongside their neighbors, the new barn began to take shape. It was during this time that Zara noticed a change in Owen. He smiled more readily, laughed more often, and the distance he had always maintained between them gradually diminished. More than once, she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression thoughtful and warm. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, Owen cleared his throat nervously. "Been thinking," he began, staring out at the horizon. "About the future, about this place." Zara waited, sensing he had more to say. "My father built this ranch hoping to pass it on someday, to family." He glanced at her briefly, then away again. "Never thought much about that myself until recently." Zara's heart began to race, but she kept her voice steady. "What changed?" Owen turned to face her fully. "You came along." He took a deep breath. "Zara, I don't have much to offer. A half-built barn, a small herd, this cabin, but what I have is yours if you want it, if you want me." The simplicity of his proposal brought tears to Zara's eyes. "Are you asking me to marry you, Owen Vance?" "Doing a poor job of it, apparently," he said with a rueful smile. "But yes, that's what I'm trying to do." Zara reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. "I was sold for 2 chickens at an auction," she said softly, "and the man who bought me is offering me everything he has." "Is that a yes?" Owen asked, his voice hopeful. "Yes," Zara whispered. "Yes, it is." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, then deepened with all the emotion they had held back for months. When they finally parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "Should have done that a long time ago," he murmured. Zara smiled. "We have plenty of time to make up for it." They were married 2 weeks later in the newly completed barn with their neighbors as witnesses. The local preacher rode 3 hours to perform the ceremony, declaring it the most unusual wedding venue he had encountered, but also one of the most meaningful. Zara wore a dress she had made from the blue fabric Owen had brought her, with wildflowers in her hair. Owen, usually most comfortable in his work clothes, had purchased a new shirt and vest for the occasion. When they spoke their vows, his voice never wavered, and the love in his eyes made Zara feel like the most precious person in the world. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other in ways they had only dreamed of before. Owen's touch was tender yet passionate, his whispered words of love carrying Zara to heights she had never imagined possible. In his arms, she found healing for the wounds of her past and hope for the future they would build together. As summer gave way to fall, the ranch prospered under their joint care. Zara's garden produced a bountiful harvest that she preserved for the winter months ahead. Owen's cattle grew fat on the summer grass, promising a good return when it came time to drive them to market. One crisp October morning, as they sat drinking coffee on the porch, Owen handed Zara a folded document. "What's this?" she asked, opening it curiously. "Deed to the ranch," Owen explained. "Had it changed in town yesterday. It's in both our names now." Zara stared at the document, reading their names side by side in official black ink. "Owen, I don't know what to say." "Don't need to say anything," he replied, covering her hand with his. "What's mine is yours. Always has been, from the moment I brought you here." Tears welled in Zara's eyes. "When I stood on that auction block, I thought my life was over. I never imagined I would find this a home, a purpose. Love." Owen brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "2 chickens well spent, I'd say." "The best investment you ever made," Zara agreed with a watery laugh. "No," Owen corrected her gently. "The best investment was the day after, when I decided to trust you with my heart." As winter settled over the valley, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a glittering wonderland, Zara and Owen found joy in the simple routines of ranch life. Their evenings were spent by the fire, sometimes reading aloud from their growing collection of books, sometimes simply talking of their hopes and dreams. It was during one such evening that Zara shared her most precious news. "Owen," she began, setting aside her mending, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked up from the harness he was repairing, his expression curious. "What is it?" Zara took a deep breath, her hand drifting unconsciously to her abdomen. "Come spring, there will be 3 of us here at the Double V." Owen's hand stilled, his eyes widening as he understood her meaning. "You're certain?" Zara nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Quite certain." The harness fell forgotten to the floor as Owen crossed to her side, kneeling before her chair. With reverent hands he touched her still flat stomach, wonder written across his features. "A child," he whispered, "our child." "Your father's legacy will continue," Zara said softly, running her fingers through his hair. "Just as he hoped." Owen looked up at her, his eyes shining with emotion. "And we'll tell our child the story of how their mother came to the Double V." "Perhaps not all the details," Zara suggested with a gentle laugh. "No," Owen agreed, rising to take her in his arms. "Just that their father found a treasure worth far more than any price he paid." As snowflakes danced outside the windows, and the fire crackled in the hearth, Zara and Owen sealed their joy with a kiss, secure in the knowledge that the greatest auction of their lives had led to the richest of rewards, a love that would sustain them through all the seasons to come. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, turning the valley green once more. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and new calves frolicked alongside their mothers. The fruit trees Owen's father had planted years ago burst into fragrant bloom, their branches buzzing with bees. On a perfect May morning, with sunshine streaming through the cabin windows, Zara gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long and difficult, but with the assistance of a neighboring woman who served as midwife, both mother and child emerged healthy and strong. "She's beautiful," Owen whispered, cradling the tiny bundle in his arms for the first time. "Perfect in every way." Zara smiled tiredly from the bed, her heart so full it seemed it might burst. "What shall we call her?" Owen considered the infant's delicate features. "How about Hope?" "Seems fitting, given everything." "Hope Vance," Zara tested the name. "I like it. Hope for new beginnings." As the years passed, the Double V flourished under their stewardship. Owen expanded the herd and added horses to their livestock. Zara's garden grew to include an orchard of her own planting. The cabin was enlarged to accommodate their growing family, which eventually included a son born 2 years after Hope. Word spread throughout the territory of the quality of the Double V Tickets cattle and horses, bringing buyers from as far away as Denver. With the additional income, Owen and Zara were able to make improvements to the ranch: a windmill for pumping water, a proper smokehouse, even a small schoolroom where Zara taught their children to read and write. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Owen surprised Zara with a special gift: a silver locket to replace the one stolen by the bandits years before. "It's not your mother's," he acknowledged as he fastened it around her neck, "but perhaps it can hold new memories." Inside, he had placed a tiny photograph of their children on one side and a lock of his own hair on the other. "It's perfect," Zara assured him, touching the locket reverently. "More precious than anything I've lost." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained throughout their years together, Owen took her hand. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About staying here all these years? About choosing this life?" Zara considered his question seriously, as she always did. "None," she answered truthfully. "This ranch, this life we've built, it's everything I never knew I wanted." Owen smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening evidence of years spent working in the mountain sun. "When I bought you for 2 chickens, folks in town thought I was crazy. Said no woman would willingly stay in this remote valley with a man like me." "You proved them wrong," Zara said, leaning against his shoulder. "You gave me more than this ranch, Owen. You gave me back my dignity, my freedom, my ability to choose. And I chose you. I choose you still every day." As twilight deepened into night, stars appeared one by one in the vast Colorado sky. In the distance, an owl called, and somewhere in the valley, a coyote answered. These were the sounds of home, familiar and comforting after a decade of life in this place that had witnessed their journey from strangers to family. 2 chickens, Owen mused, his arm around Zara's shoulders. "Best trade I ever made." Zara smiled in the darkness. "And the ranch you gave in return, was it worth it?" Owen turned to her, his face barely visible in the starlight but his voice rich with certainty. "For you, Zara Vance, I would have given everything I owned and counted myself fortunate. This ranch these years, our children, they're the reward for the one good decision I made that day." "Which was?" Zara prompted. "Recognizing treasure when I saw it," Owen replied simply, "even when it was standing on an auction block." As the night deepened around them, Zara and Owen remained on the porch, their lives entwined as surely as the roots of the cottonwood trees that had witnessed their love story unfold, a story that began with 2 chickens and a desperate bargain, but grew into a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come on the land they both cherished. In the years that followed, the Double V became known not only for its fine horses and cattle, but also as a haven for those in need. Remembering her own desperate circumstances, Zara never turned away a traveler seeking shelter or work. Many stayed only briefly before moving on, but others remained longer, becoming part of the extended family that gathered around the Vance table. Hope grew into a young woman with her father's blue eyes and her mother's quiet strength. She showed a remarkable talent for working with horses, gentling even the most spirited colts with patience and understanding. Their son, Daniel, inherited Owen's height and Zara's love of books, often disappearing for hours with a volume from their now substantial library. On Hope's 18th birthday, as the family celebrated with a special dinner, she made an announcement that surprised no one who had been paying attention. "Thomas Baker asked me to marry him," she said, her cheeks flushing with happiness. "And I said yes." Thomas was the son of a neighboring rancher, a thoughtful young man who had been courting Hope with Owen's cautious approval for nearly a year. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Zara asked, though she already knew the answer from the glow in her daughter's eyes. Hope nodded confidently. "As sure as you were about father." Owen cleared his throat, clearly emotional but trying not to show it. "Thomas is a good man, works hard, treats you with respect." He reached for Zara's hand under the table. "If he loves you half as much as I love your mother, you'll be well cared for." "He does," Hope assured him. "And we want to build our home here on the Double V if you'll allow it. Thomas says his father's ranch is for his older brother, and he'd rather be here anyway." The thought of their daughter remaining close filled both Zara and Owen with joy. Together, they had created not just a ranch but a legacy, a place where generations could put down roots and flourish. The wedding took place the following spring, with Hope wearing a dress fashioned from fabric Zara had carefully saved for this very occasion. As Owen walked his daughter across the yard to where Thomas waited beside the preacher, Zara could see in his proud stance the same man who had once risked everything to rescue a stranger from an auction block. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Owen pulled Zara aside. "Remember our wedding day?" he asked, his voice low and intimate. "Every moment," Zara assured him, smiling at the memory. We were married in a newly built barn with barely enough guests to fill a single bench. And now look. Owen gestured to the gathering neighbors, friends, and family filling the yard, spilling onto the porch, their laughter and conversation creating a tapestry of sound that wrapped around the ranch like a blessing. "We built this," Zara said, her heart full as she surveyed all they had accomplished. "Not just the buildings or the herds, but this community, this family." Owen's arm tightened around her waist, started with 2 chickens and a leap of faith, and became everything I ever dreamed of, Zara finished for him. As the years continued to pass, the Double V grew and changed. Daniel married a schoolteacher from town and built a home on the eastern edge of the ranch. Hope and Thomas welcomed 3 children of their own, filling the valley with the sounds of a new generation at play. Owen's hair turned silver, and lines of laughter etched themselves more deeply around Zara's eyes, but their love remained as steady as the mountains that cradled their valley. They worked side by side, sharing the labor and the rewards, the sorrows and the joys that came with their chosen life. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children surprised them with a gathering of everyone who had been touched by the Vance family's generosity over the years. Former ranch hands, neighbors who had received help during hard times, travelers who had found shelter. They came from near and far to honor the couple whose kindness had made a difference in their lives. As the sun set on that remarkable day, Owen and Zara once again found themselves on the porch of the cabin that had been their first home together. "Did you ever imagine this?" Owen asked, his voice soft with wonder. "All these lives we've touched," Zara shook her head. "Never. When I stood on that auction block, I couldn't see beyond the next hour, let alone 30 years into the future." Owen took her hand, his touch as familiar and essential to her as breathing. "I'm glad I had those 2 chickens with me that day." Zara laughed, the sound as bright and clear as it had been in her youth. "And I'm grateful every day that you were willing to part with them." "Best investment I ever made," Owen said, echoing words he had spoken many times over their years together. "Bought me a ranch hand and got a wife, a family, and a lifetime of happiness in return." As darkness settled over the Double V, stars appearing one by one in the vast Colorado sky, Zara rested her head on her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that a journey that had begun in desperation had led her to the greatest blessing of all, a love that had transformed not only her life, but the lives of all who had been fortunate enough to cross their path. From 2 chickens to a legacy that would endure for generations to come, theirs was a story of redemption, of second chances, and of the profound truth that the most valuable possessions are not things that can be bought or sold, but the connections forged between hearts that recognize in each other the promise of home. And in the quiet of the evening, as the ranch settled into peaceful slumber around them, Owen and Zara Vance held fast to each other, grateful for the auction that had brought them together and the love that had made them whole.